Well, hello everyone. How are you doing? I was not planning on doing a show tonight. But, you know, yeah, there's always, I suppose, drama in the LP. And though I'm very minimally involved, this has been something I've been covering, and it is the Martin v. LNC JC appeal. So, I should try to remember to stick up here, but I've been getting better at it, but don't always remember to put the links up here. But Hector Roos has entered the chat, the LP's Flim Flam man, as we know him. And I wasn't planning on writing anything in this case, but Hector Roos's amicus, it just required some response. Now, I want to get some preliminary words out here, not directly necessarily relevant to Hector, but just in these cases in general. Oh, and there's a comment here. King Frog had said, I tried to watch my Jubilee episode this week, but it was painful to watch. Everyone on the panel was so bad at arguing, except for you. I had a good time with it. I would do some clips from it, but Jubilee does not like you clipping. But they did a short on one where I said to the guy, because he was like, if you've got, why do you need so much money? Talking about people, millionaires or whatever it was. And I was like, who are you to decide? Go and blow all your money. I should have said hookers and blow, but instead I said, what, strippers? I go, that's your business. In any event, to get back on this JC thing, with the JC, with any arguments, because there might be more amicus, it's a sparring match. You win some, you lose some. This is going to become relevant as we get into his filings. So we went through Austin Martin's filing, which I'm fairly convinced was written by AI, but not entirely sure, but I'm fairly sure. I am nearly absolutely sure that Hector Roos's was written by AI. I did a reply. You could tell I wasn't written by AI because I was in such a hurry that now that I'm reading it again, I see grammar issues, and mostly grammar issues that an AI would have caught if I even put it through AI. But when I'm dealing with this, where it's like a one-on-one debate with people and it's a submission to the Judicial Committee, perhaps I should have ran it through AI for grammar, because I do think, an error here or there, fine. But when you have too many, I do think maybe that's a matter of respect. I did proofread it multiple times. But the problem with proofreading is your eyes see what you intended to say rather than what you actually said. The best way to proofread, if you all don't know this, if you have text to speech on your computer, is have your computer read it back to you. You will hear errors that your eyes would not have caught. In any event, we're going to go over these. I'm going to refer you to the last show to get the gist of what's going on if you don't know what's going on. So I'm not going to cover every single point in here, because the thing is, it's not necessary for every single opposing point to be wrong. The threshold issues, I do think I'm absolutely right on. The other issues, there's some that could be arguable, others that are not. But Hector just completely missed my point. But again, let me see. I didn't queue up screens. So we're going to be pulling the PDFs right on screen here. So give me a second. I should have probably have done this. Is it an image overlay that's a PDF? Is this it? Yes, this is it. So let's pull this up and what I'm just going to scoot over. That's the easiest way to solve this problem. So this is Hector Roos's appeal. I didn't print it out, so maybe if I scooch a little closer, or we can make it a little bigger. I can read it on the screen here. But let's say what I was just going to pull it up on, yeah, I'm going to pull it up on my laptop here. Why not? So if you all want to read all of the rulings in this, you could just go to lpedia.org and look up Judicial Committee 2022 through 2026. It has their list of cases for the year. And speaking of win some, lose some, I mean, there's some on there that I lost. That's the way it goes, but this will be the most recent one to declare invalid the LNC action purporting to void the Region 1 election of May 10th, 2025, and to clarify the interpretation of sustaining membership status rights and regional autonomy. So, not going to go through everything Martin said again. Did that in a prior show. Is within the past few weeks, so you'll be able to find it easy enough on the channel. So let's actually, I'm going to have to backtrack. I said I didn't intend to file anything. I'm so busy. I actually did file something in support of the LNC. So I do got to backtrack. Hector was responding in part to me. So that was something incorrect I said. So we're going to go through at least the important parts of his response. We're not going through the entire thing. Again, because I've mostly said what I wanted to say. I think Jonathan McGee did a real good job. But I want you to look at the third paragraph here. It says, because, for one thing, you're really going to recognize reading through this, and I'm going to give you the telltale signs when we look at my response that this was written by AI. But let me give you some tells right now, and the same tells are in his next reply. There's terminology that's used in here. It's just off. It's not that it's wrong. It's just that it's off. I'm trying to think of an example. When you're dealing with bylaws and rules and stuff like that, there's certain terminology that is just what is used. And he uses things like administrative processes and stuff like that. It is such AI speak. It's not language that you generally use in this context. Like, a point of order is not an administrative process. An administrative process is like, if you're going to, if we're going to relate this to Roberts, it would be like when the chair or the presiding officer has authority of the details of administration, and that doesn't have to do with like points of order and ruling on parliamentary procedure. That's not administrative process. Administrative process would be like a standing rule that says, when lining up at the credentials committee booth, get into lines by the first letter of your last name, A through this letter on this line and through Z on this line. And I agree with you, King Fraud. I do think it's malicious to use AI in something like this. And the reason why is, again, you're engaging in personal dialogue, and you are asking volunteers to spend their time reading and responding to this. They deserve to interact with your mind. I won't have a problem with using AI maybe to help boost your creativity. Go, this is the argument I want to make, helping you craft some language, but using it almost entirely for the argument, which has happened here. Because if you read this and Hector, this isn't even in his voice. Now, y'all know I don't have a good opinion of Hector. To put it bluntly, I think he's dumb as a rock. But he has a particular style and voice, and this isn't it. But we'll give the tells later where I do think it's in some of it's in bad faith. You can make wrong arguments in good faith. I'm sure over the course of multiple filings with the Judicial Committee, I have made plenty of wrong arguments in good faith, and I'll do so again. But I want you to look at this third paragraph here. He says, because the Libertarian Party bylaws contain no provision establishing automatic suspension of sustaining membership rights, this makes no sense because it isn't a sustaining membership right, but we'll get into that. It goes, the interpretation advanced by the respondent effectively creates an unwritten eligibility rule. Now you see that he is conflating membership status with eligibility. But is there really an unwritten eligibility rule? The bylaws say that LNC members shall be sustaining members of the party. He agrees that's an eligibility requirement. But yet he says there's an unwritten eligibility rule. I don't know. It seems to me plainly stating in the bylaws that the LNC members shall be sustaining members of the party is about as written as you can get. But in any, it's full of these kind of weird logic that AI does that might seem logical on paper, but it makes no sense in an actual human context. Okay. So we're gonna go over the breadth of his arguments, and then we're going to get into some specifics with my reply. So he asks whether the chair of the LNC possesses the power to unilaterally void the election of a regional representative. As I said in the first episode on this, the chair, listen, I have beef with Nikayla. Everyone knows that. But I also try to be fair. He did not unilaterally do anything because a point of order was raised. If there is any fault in that, and if the decision was wrong, the LNC made that decision. This puts like almost supernatural power in the hands of the chair. It was appealed. Once it's appealed, and the LNC sustains the ruling, the LNC takes ownership of that. This thing is entirely unfair to Stephen Nikayla. And I don't say that very often. And there is probably going to be a new filing I'm going to submit to the JC, but I'll tell you my practice with the JC now, and it wasn't this way in the past, and I'm sure I annoyed them, is I only respond to new points that need a response that I don't think were sufficiently dealt with, or a new argument that I've come up with. And not come up with, that I've, well, come up with might be the right way, but that sounds like you're inventing something out of whole cloth. A new argument that I just realized that I'm going to be submitting to the JC, but you guys are going to get to hear it here because I'm not playing hide the ball or anything here. Okay. And then he says the LNC brief concedes the central premise. No, it doesn't, but in any event, let's go to the next page. Robert's Rules requires explicit authority to restrict member rights. We can argue about the applicability and how it interplays with our bylaws, but let's just, that statement on its own is in fact true, but we're not talking about membership rights here. So anyone can concede that, but it doesn't, this has nothing to do with membership rights. And then it says suspension of member rights require disciplinary procedures. Here's also where he's going really off track. There were no membership rights. And this should backdoor you into seeing that. If this involved member rights, then the LNC should have the authority to be able to take disciplinary action against it. However, the bylaws do not grant the LNC authority to exercise a disciplinary action against a member not a member of the LNC, a member of the party. That is reserved to the delegates assembled in convention. There was no suspension of member rights here, however. But none of this really matters because the issue is moot. That's the core issue that I want to focus on. So we're going to the next page. The LNC interpretation creates an unwritten eligibility rule. That is the argument he should have titled this is, even though it wouldn't be correct, the LNC interpretation creates an unwritten, how would I put this? I don't even, an unwritten rule for membership rights of lapsed members or something in that extent. It says the bylaws show when the party intends automatic vacancies, it states them explicitly. Now, I didn't put this in my reply, but that's, in fact, actually not correct. But I think Jonathan McGee dealt with that sufficiency. Even if a lapse occurred, the proper remedy lied with the region. The region conducted a new election, so it did handle. But this is where a new argument I've realized that I will be submitted, and then we're going to deal with the response to me. It says the amicus assumes that a lapse in sustaining membership automatically terminates membership status. I never said that, and it doesn't assume that. This is an AI or real. This is this is just a fundamental and a misunderstanding of my argument. It's on the next page. The amicus treats it solely as an eligibility requirement. It is an eligibility requirement. But here's the main issue. He says the issue is not moot because the legality of the LNC action remains resolved. That's not what mootness means under Robert's rules. Let's say, I'm trying to think of an old LNC action, or let's just make up one. Let's say last term, I can't even come up with something that would be like so obvious that everyone would agree. But let's just say last term, the LNC did something, a very limited effect, but it just really blatantly, well, let's say that that's not even a good one either. But they blatantly broke the bylaws. And then it was a motion, they carried it out, and now the motion's no longer in effect. Whether or not that motion is correct is still unresolved, but that doesn't mean it's not moot. Let's say there was a bylaws provision. There's actually a good one in this article that I'm going to read that will explain the mootness issue. This is by Mr. Jacobs. He and I are not BFF, but this is a good article, and I did attach it to my amicus. So, okay. Now, what's interesting here, but note the date of this. So Roos is quoting something that was submitted in 2009. I'm not really good at math, but that is what? 2009, so 10, 16, that's like 17 years ago. So he's submitting something, an argument that Mike Seebeck made to the Judicial Committee. Mike's now on the JC, but he wasn't on the JC back then, in support. But he's like quoting it like it was the JC decision, but it doesn't really matter. He's using a 2009 argument of Mike Seebeck. Crap, I'm trying to think of now. That's fine to use someone's argument, but it's also 2009. I can tell you there are arguments I would have advanced, crap, maybe within even the past year that I don't agree with. So I'm just going to say right here that yes, this argument that Mike made in the appeal of Lee rights in 2009 would support Hector's argument, but it's wrong. I don't know whether Mike would agree with me, but I know today he might still think it's correct. I don't know. Everyone who thinks Mike and I walk lockstep on everything, we don't. But I will say I've had a lot of conversations with Mike as both of us have been learning more and more, where we just laugh and go, "Oh my God, I used to think something and I was so convinced of it." And it was wrong. Like, as I've learned more, I realized it was wrong. I'm thinking back to when I first got involved with the party and on the LNC, these procedural arguments I used to have with Alicia Matson. And looking back on it now, I'm like embarrassed because I was so wrong and she was right. And I was convinced I was right. But I wasn't, because I didn't know then. She knew more than I did. Back in 2009, I wasn't even in the party. But if I go back to when I first started, I probably would make arguments like this. But this argument is just not correct. So we'll read what Mike said, because Mike is a much better writer than Hector. The question is not made moot by the reappointment of Lee rights. The relief requested is not just that rights be recognized as at large, but also that the removal be overturned. I disagree with Mike. I think the reappointment would, in fact, make it moot. There's a little bit of a wrinkle here that I'm not even going to get into, but I would have said it. Now, I probably wouldn't have said that 10 years ago, but today I would say it makes it moot. I'd be really curious if Mike still agrees here. There is a nuance that could be made that perhaps Mike would be making, but he and I disagree on points. Okay, let's see. Going down. Is that the end of it? Let me see here. Yeah. Okay, let's go now to my response. I'm going to put King Frog's statement up here. It's like, bruh, you have so much beef in the Libertarian Party. It's crazy. The small, what's that expression? Like the smaller the group, the more vicious the battles, the more inconsequential the outcome, the more strident the battles. It's politics. Something I'm learning just by following some Colorado local politics that aren't libertarian politics, like things that are going on in the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. It makes our little squabbles just look like child's play. Anyone who is super involved and passionate about it is going to have strong disagreements. That's just the way it is. I get into things. I do mix it up. Guilty. I mean, that's just my nature. I'm a brawler and I get in there. But one thing I'll also say is, you've heard me say here, when I come to a realization that I was wrong on something, I'll be the first to admit it. Because if you're going to get in the scrap, you also have to be willing to say, yeah, that was dumb. So now we're going to pull up hold on. I'm sorry that just move this over. So this is my response. And we're going to go over a lot of this. So, because here's where I'm going to show that it was AI. And then when we look at his reply to my response, you'll see he did AI to reply, and the point went completely over his head. So you'll notice I start here, and we're going to go over this in a lot fuller, but not entirely in full. I say this response will be limited to information not already covered or that which needs supplementation. Now, Hector apparently didn't read this because he kind of says, well, he doesn't kind of say, he says in his reply, there's one big issue that she didn't even address here. It wasn't my intent to address everything, because I wanted to concentrate, as you'll see on this next page where I highlighted something. We're going to go back here, that there are jurisdictional foundational issues that it doesn't even matter the rest of them. I mean, they may ultimately matter like in principle, but to the JC, it's moot. So they don't even need to reach the other issues. Did that make sense? But I'm just going to show you where Hector just is using AI or just isn't very smart. So this first quote there, the inherent mootness, this is a direct quote from Roos. You could see I cited it as Roos, page 5, emphasis added. He says, Robert's rules recognize that some questions may become moot when they lack continuing force. I didn't even look up that citation there, 3522. One thing I learned in reviewing this is I tend to just take people at their word. If they're saying something, says something, I'm going to the meat of their argument. Okay, that is correct. It's funny he didn't read it because it says it has to have continuing force and effect. Okay, however, actions taken in violation of bylaws remain subject to review and correction. That phrase, review and correction, also just isn't something that people arguing about parliamentary procedure use. That is such AI language. I say that is not correct. This is the entire proceeding context for and up through that second Roberts quote, which is Roberts 23:6a. The only exceptions to the requirement that a point of order must be promptly made at the time of the breach arise in connection with breaches that are of a continuing nature. Since Mr. Wiley got reelected, but even more importantly, he since resigned from his position, it's moot. It's moot. It's not even if it was a breach, the LNC's decision that he wasn't eligible because he wasn't a sustaining member, it's been mooted by subsequent events, whereby the action taken in violation of the rules is null and void. In such cases, a point of order can be made at any time during the continuance of the breach. When the breach has been made irrelevant by subsequent actions, it's not continuing. Let me give you an example. So in 2021, if you want to go back to beef, right? The LNC allegedly removed me from the secretary position. Listen, I need the trifecta, I guess. I need to get elected again and have another LNC attempt to remove me. I appealed it. I lost the appeal. Unlike this last time with MAGA McCardle, I won the appeal. But I lost the appeal. I had an argument that the decision was a breach of the bylaws. How long did that breach continue? If there's an illegitimate removal, how long does that breach continue? It only continues to adjournment sine die of the next convention. Why? Because that's when the term of office would naturally expire. And there'll be a new election. Even if the same person gets reelected for another term, it's a new term. So if I was going to challenge that decision, and the only people to challenge it to was the delegates in convention, I had to do it that convention, which was the Reno convention. I couldn't have challenged that decision in DC because it would have been moot. The breach would have had an expiration date of end of term. Does that make sense? And the person who taught me all of that was Jonathan Jacobs. He's correct, but just so you know, that's who tutored me on that. And I agree with him. I think he is correct on that. I could not have raised a point of order after it, once that convention was over with, because the breach would have been terminated through subsequent events, the subsequent event being the election of a new LNC. It didn't matter that I got reelected to the position. It's the position, not the person in that case. Okay, next page. And I said, nothing said here is novel. An alleged breach is moot when it is healed. In support, I attach a 2004 article from Jonathan M. Jacobs, The Healed Breach. And I go on to say, even though this is an older article, because remember that thing from Mike Seebeck was 2009, I'm going back to 2004. But Mr. Jacobs was a professional registered parliamentarian back there, writing as a PRP, not as a member of some organization, but like in a professional capacity. And I say, more importantly, this is a threshold issue. The JC could and should rightly, and you could see my grammar error, it should say rightly determine that this is a moot issue and deny on those grounds without any need for further review. They don't need to get into any of these other issues. Now, I'm going to truncate some of this, but I'm going to read a good deal of this in full, because I really want you guys to understand this issue of a breach of a continuing nature. That's another reason why I do these shows. It isn't, this JC thing's going to be over and done. What someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, you move on. But these principles of just how to think of these things, I think are what's useful. And I'm hoping that you're finding useful. So he starts, and actually, let me go down some pages because I do have the art. I know you can hardly read it here. If anyone, yeah, I'm going to read it out. Ooh, almost shut my laptop. I'm going to read it out loud. So I'm sorry it's so tiny on there. It says, a violation of the rules, a breach of the rules is subject to a point of order. And the vast bulk of violations of the rules, the point of order, he does a lot of skipped words too, so I don't feel so bad for some of my grammar errors. The point of order must be made at the time the breach occurs. Like, you can't wait. Usually it's you snooze, you lose. But there are some exceptions to that, and a breach of the bylaws is an exception to that. In a few cases, points of order do not need to be made in a timely manner. Roberts, I'm just going to abbreviate it to Roberts, defines those as being breaches of a continuing nature. And we went over that when I showed you those highlighted paragraphs. In such cases, a point of order can be made at any time during the continuation of the breach. Actions taken in those circumstances are void. It's fairly easy to construct cases where a breach can occur for a long period of time. For example, assume a main motion was previously adopted to set the organization's parking fee at $15 per month. Then a motion to set the parking fee at $25 a month is adopted at the January monthly meeting by less than a 2/3 vote, and with no previous notice and with less than a majority of the entire membership. So what he's trying to say in a lot of words, it didn't pass with a sufficient vote threshold. Given the requirements to rescind or amend something previously adopted, the adoption of this motion is subject to a point of order at that or any future meeting. Likewise, if the bylaws require that officers be members, the election of a non-member officer at the January meeting for a 2-year term could be challenged at the February or any other meeting during the year. These would both be examples of a continuing breach. The breach exists beyond the instance that it occurs. When the breach continues, the opportunity to raise a point of order can continue beyond the moment that the breach occurs. In some cases, Notice in some cases. So he's conceding a breach occurred, not in this, I mean, in this hypothetical argument, and that in some cases it is possible to raise a point of order years later, but not in all cases, which is what Roos would have you say, that until some official body says you are wrong, it's not moot. That's not how it works in parliamentary procedure. The fact of a bad decision is going to exist into perpetuity. A breach of a bylaws does not. So he says, in some cases, it would be possible for a point of order to be raised years after the breach occurred. It is also possible for the breach to end or heal of its own accord without any further action of the assembly. These healed breaches do occur. Changing some of the above examples will produce them. So he gives an example. The motion that the parking fee shall be set at $15. At the May meeting, a motion is adopted that for the months of June, July, and August of this year, the parking fee shall be set at $25. It also is adopted without proper notice or the proper vote threshold. But at the monthly meeting of June, July, and August, where the fee was raised to $25, nobody raises a point of order. In September, so after the raised parking fee has expired, it's back to $15. In September, someone raises a point of order, but there's nothing to raise it against. I hope this is making sense to you guys. This is so important. If the motion had set the fee higher for 3 months of each year, not just the current one, it would be enforced and subject to a point of order. But the totally void main motion is no longer in force in this case. The continuance of the breach has ended. A point of order can no longer be raised. And then he also says, here's if someone was elected treasurer and the bylaws say that the treasurer shall be bonded as a condition of eligibility and serve for a term of 2 years, and you elect someone who isn't bonded, but then they leave office, even though their election violated the bylaws, it is too late to raise a point of order. The assembly took no action and the breach has naturally healed. So that is really analogous to the situation that we have here. So the breach healed of its own accord. It healed of its own accord in 2 ways. I never really said in which way. Well, maybe I did. I don't want to say I didn't. I might have implied it. I might have said it. But it wasn't a main point of my argument. It was healed in 2 ways. A, there was a re-election of Mr. Wiley. But B, he later resigned from the position. It's just no longer an issue. The fact that you think the LNC was wrong and you're going to continue to think that the LNC was wrong doesn't create a breach of a continuing nature. It just creates your opinion of a continuing nature, and that's fine. I think the LNC is wrong on multiple things. And you'll see an example I gave in my initial amicus was, I obviously think the LNC was absolutely wrong with the joint fundraising agreement. But the joint fundraising agreement has been terminated. I believe there was a breach. The JC didn't agree, but under his argument, I should be able to raise it with the next JC. But the reason why I can't raise it with the next JC is because it's moot. My opinion of it continues. I do think it's an unresolved issue, like if a future LNC can do it, but it's not something that's subject to a JC appeal because it's moot. Now, and it's also not something that I can't go to convention and void the JFC. I can't go to the Grand Rapids convention if I'm even going to be there. I can't raise a point of order and declare it void. It's a moot issue. what I can do is raise I could pass a motion that the delegates in convention resolve that they didn't think it was correct and give guidance for a future LNC, but you can't void the thing that's already happened and is over with. You can raise all kinds of motions stating opinions, stating interpretations for future guidance, but you can't void that agreement. Okay, let's go back. Okay, lapse of dues and membership rights. I said Roos is confused about differences between membership rights and eligibility requirements. I used to do things like this. When you first get into the LP or libertarianism, you're really gung-ho on rights. Everything's a, you know what I mean? You get your quills get really raised. But under Roberts, and Mike and I are the same way. We got real like, this is a right, this is a right. Well, some things that I used to say were rights because it just intuitively felt like that really aren't. And when it comes to membership rights, just fundamental membership rights, Roberts defines them. What Roos is claiming is like I don't even want to call it a benefit or a privilege. That's not a fundamental right. So the bylaws say that LNC members must be sustaining members, but that, and it defines sustaining members as someone who paid dues. So there's a weird parallel situation here where Roberts talks about fundamental rights that can't be removed even if you lapse in dues without some kind of bylaws mechanism to remove you from the membership rolls. But that's completely different from an eligibility requirement. Roberts is really familiar with eligibility requirements. Roberts is also very familiar with the fact that most organizations, and it's not true all the time, because you can have non-organization member board members. Like sometimes some organizations will bring in like a distinguished expert, like if they're, depending on what kind of society they are, to sit on their board of directors. But a lot of times being a member means that you're eligible to be elected to the governing body. But that's never described as a membership right. The membership rights are defined here that the right to attend meetings, to make motions, to speak and to debate and to vote. No member can be individually deprived of these basic rights of membership. So, except through disciplinary proceedings. So I go on to say that there is no fundamental right to be elected to the LNC. These are two different categories. So what Hector is relying upon is Roberts 4511. Austin Martin was also, but let's go read that. Voting rights of a member in arrears. So all it is talking about is voting rights, not any other privileges or benefits or even adjacent things. They're not a basic right. So he says the voting rights of a member in arrears. A member of a society who is in arrear in payment of his dues, but who has not been formally dropped from the membership rolls and is not under a disciplinary suspension, retains the full rights of a voting member and is entitled to vote, except as the bylaws may otherwise provide. We can argue about except as the bylaws. I'm just going to concede that point for sake of argument for this case, because it doesn't matter. The thing that they retain is the full rights of a voting member. So if we go to And those rights are like rights that are defined in Roberts, that we just read. It isn't the right to be on the LNC. I mean, that's the fundamental argument here. But here's the thing. Even if it did, the issue is moot. That's why the mootness thing is the most important argument here. There's a footnote here. Yeah, that footnote doesn't. They even talk about a member whose rights, some of their rights have been suspended, and it says for if only some of the individual's rights as a member are under suspension, for example, the right to make motions and speak in debate, other rights of assembly membership may still be exercised, for example, the rights to attend meetings and vote. It doesn't say the right to hold positions or anything like that. That's not a basic membership right. And Roos just has this I think he has a fundamental misunderstanding. But again, it doesn't matter because this whole issue is moot. Okay, go to the next one. And here's an argument that Roos just doesn't understand, and I want you guys to understand it. I said to take Roos's argument to its logical conclusion, basically that you remain a sustaining member and you have all of the benefits of that, not just basic rights of membership, because he thinks everything is subsumed in that. Unless you've been formally dropped from the membership rolls. And Robert says in order to be formally dropped from the membership rolls, the bylaws have to specify how that is done. And there's nothing in the LP bylaws that says that. Everyone can concede that. The implications of that, people can argue about, but the fact is that language is not in there. I go, so if we're going to say that people who have not been formally dropped from the membership rolls, which our bylaws do not provide for, retain all of the characteristics of being a sustaining member, not just those basic rights, everything that has to do with being a sustaining member. I said no one could ever appeal to the JC based upon petition of 1% of the sustaining membership, because that number would be practically unknown, spanning back to the formation of the party as persons became arrears and dues. So he's basically saying our sustaining membership number can never go down. Do you get that? Because they're not formally dropped. Therefore, even though people each year sign up and then don't renew the next year, we should have a party membership. If you want to go back that far, crap, we were at 30-something thousand at the Brown presidential campaign. I mean, maybe we should have 100-something thousand members now. Who knows? But the only thing that's retained under Roberts, the only carve out, is the voting rights. And we do delegates at convention, so it's really even unclear how that would apply. But we'll get into that. But here's what's more important. Even further, his argument would require the conclusion that delegate allocations have never been correct for the same reason. And he just fundamentally does not understand this point. You'll see. All those lapsed members should have been counted in the formula. The formula in the LP bylaws, if we can pull those up for a minute, I think it's in Article 10. Let's just move these over. Yeah, it's in Article 10. And if you look, it's delegates to, no, is it to, let's go down to the next page. Yeah, delegate allocation. So it's subparagraph 4 there. I don't have the bylaws up here, and boy, that's tiny. But it says, that there'll be a count of the sustaining members, and that is 1/2 of the delegate allocation equation, and you do it by percentages of the states. Well, if we're supposed to be if people retain all the characteristics of sustaining memberships, they also would retain the right to be counted towards the sustaining membership for their state in order to count delegate allocations. But that's absurd. That's absurd and impossible. It means we haven't had proper delegate allocations since the first member that ever became lapsed in dues in 1972. So I go on to say, get that off the screen, that that if there are two plausible interpretations of the bylaws, though I deny that his interpretation is plausible, one of which conflicts with or renders absurd another bylaw provision, and the other meaning does not, the one that doesn't render it absurd is the correct one. Okay. And then I say, since no fundamental rights as a member of the Libertarian Party were at issue here, the disciplinary provisions don't apply. Okay, now here's the part y'all are going to chuckle at. So it says, a personal plea. AI is not a lawyer nor an RONR expert. The Roos amicus contains telltale signs of being written by AI. How so? With RONR, Roberts, AI is notorious for blanket sites, because I've challenged AI. I like arguing with AI. A lot of you know that I'm a paralegal by day. I'll come up with like cockamamie legal theories, or I'm just thinking about legal things. And I like challenging AI to see like what it's, and half the time, like it'll give me a case on something and it's wrong. It hallucinated it. I got hair in my mouth. I don't know how that happened. But I do that sometimes with Roberts too. I challenge it. And it's really bad with Roberts. And it's got some telltale signs. And and that will come up here. So, or it will give you specific citations that don't say what's represented. And you have to push back. So then I quote Hector Roos. And he says, Roberts' rules instructs that governing documents must be interpreted according to their express provisions, and that restrictions on members' rights cannot be implied where the rules themselves are silent. And he gives two citations, RONR 28 and Section 56. Section 56 is a whole chapter. Where? But let's just look up 28. Notice he said, this is what it says. Governing documents must be interpreted according to their express provisions. So he is saying that 2.8 talks about interpretation of the bylaws. There's actually something in 56 that does. I think it's 5668. I could have that citation slightly wrong. But 2.8. And that restrictions on members' rights can't be implied. So he is saying that 2.8 says that. So let's go to 2.8. And let's see what it says. Because 2.8 is certainly a reference that exists, but does it say that? Well, it's got 4 subparts. It doesn't say anything about interpretation. And it doesn't say anything about restrictions on members' rights can't be implied. So, I mean, we could read it. In general, the Constitution or bylaws or both of us, it's long. It says that it contains its own basic rules. defines the primary characteristics of the organization, prescribes how the society functions, and includes all rules that the society considers so important. And it goes on to talk about the rules. But it doesn't say anything about interpretation or restriction on members' rights cannot be implied where the rules themselves are silent. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with the statement that he said. What I disagree with is the citation that he gave. He could have given different citations. Okay. And then 56 where? Yeah, the principles of interpretation are in 56, but it didn't give an actual full citation. And let me see if it is 5668. Yeah, 5668 is the principles of interpretation. And actually, I don't think it says must be interpreted according to their express provisions. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that statement, but none of the principles of interpretation necessarily say that. Here are the principles. We're not going to read the explanation of them, but just the little short sentence. 1, each society decides for itself the meaning of its bylaws. 2, when a provision of the bylaws is susceptible to 2 meanings. This is one that I quoted earlier. 1 which would render other bylaws absurd. The one that doesn't do that is the correct one. 3, a general statement or rule is always of less authority than a specific statement of a rule. If the bylaws authorize certain things specifically, other things of the same class are thereby prohibited. A provision granting certain privileges carries with it a right to a part of the privilege, but prohibits a greater privilege. A prohibition or limitation prohibits everything greater than what is prohibited, but it permits what is less. The imposition of a definite penalty for a particular action prohibits the increase or decrease of the penalty. In cases where the bylaws use a general term and also 2 or more specific terms that are wholly included under the general one, a rule in which only the general term is used applies to the specific terms. Those are the principles. I mean, he could have made that argument about express provisions, but you would think with a citation that if you went to those citations, you would see exactly what he said there. I'm not claiming even here that what he said is wrong. I'm just claiming the citations don't clearly support that. Now, but here's the more important thing. I don't want to read King Frog's comment here. Just, he says, I debated once, one that was supposed to be programmed to argue for a Christian nationalist position, said that conservatives don't hate gay marriage because they're homophobic. They hate it because they don't want the government and marriage essentially misrepresenting the ideology and confusing it with libertarianism. That sounds about right. Okay. Let's go to, here's where I really had objections. So the next page. He says these points with citations after them. So you would expect those citations up at the top there to say what he just said, right? I mean, that's the whole point. But these citations, it's not, again, that I disagree with the point. I'm disagreeing that the citation supports it. And they're so basic, it'd be like me saying, in order to write a paper, first, you must be sure to breathe. See human biology textbook, page, whatever. Like, it's so basic, you don't need to say it. You are arguing to the Judicial Committee about bylaws. It means there's already some fundamental agreement. Like, why aren't you in here proving the existence of the Libertarian Party? If we're going to go down to these basics. So he later, like, gets all upset saying, like, I disagreed with the print, no. A, they don't need to be said. They're so basic. This is fluff with citations to make it look like you're more knowledgeable or presenting more of an argument than you already are. This is filler. But my objection is that the citations don't support the point. So, governing documents control the authority of officers and boards. RONR 17. Okay, does RONR 17 say that? No, it doesn't. RONR 17 talks about the principle of a majority vote. And when it's not a majority, that the next most commonly used vote threshold is 2/3. And it also talks about previous notice and the call of a meeting. None of that has to do with governing documents control the authority of officers and boards. 17 is cited a lot for the general principle that in order for a decision to be the act of an assembly, something needs to pass by at least a majority vote, and it gives different vote thresholds for certain things. So I agree that governing documents control everything, not just officers and boards. It controls everything about an assembly. But 17 doesn't say that. 2/8 does. 17 doesn't. Then it says, bylaws take precedence over all other rules and practices. RONR 21. A, that statement is false, by the way. Bylaws do not take precedence over all other rules and practices. So I do disagree with that statement, but I'm being pedantic. In this circumstance here for this appeal, are the bylaws the ultimate authority? Yeah. But that statement's not correct. But what does 2.1 say? Now, 2.1 talks about having rules, but it says nothing about precedence. It says an organized society requires certain rules to establish its basic structure and manner of operation. And you should have formally adopted rules of procedure. But it doesn't say anything about precedence. This is AI extrapolating out of something. This isn't a human. You would go and look that up and go, oh, yeah, that's true. So, like, where, I'm trying to, yeah, that would be more 2.8 again. And then he goes, rules cannot be overridden through interpretation or administrative practice. That's the phrase. Administrative practice just isn't something, that's an AI phrase. You all know that. I mean, anyone who's familiar with AI, like, clock that. You just clock that. Particularly if you're familiar with, like, talking about bylaws or parliamentary stuff. Administrative practice is just not a phrase that's used. It's completely foreign. And an AI wouldn't know that because it's kind of like culture. But it makes no sense. What does that even mean? It doesn't have a meaning here. And he says that's in 2.8. But 2.8 doesn't say that. 2.8 doesn't talk about interpretation, and it doesn't talk about whatever the heck like administrative practice is supposed to be. And in fact, 2.8 contains a section talking about how certain rules can be overridden. So that's not even precisely true. Rules and the bylaws that are in the nature of a rule of order can be overridden. That's one of the sections in 2.8. So this is so obviously AI, and that he didn't go and read them. And that language wording is just like so cringe. Administrative practice? That, King Frog, you can clock AI. I mean, come on. But I'm going to give you another big clue right here. I said RONR 17 is not even remotely related to that point. RONR 21 and 28 do not say what is claimed, and RONR 56 is an entire chapter on the content and composition of bylaws, which comprises 56.1 through 56.68. So it's got like 68 subsections there. Like, which you can't just go RONR 56. That's just like me. Why don't I just go RONR? Find it yourself. You got to give a citation. But I said, the completely improper citation method is also another giveaway. And then I say, such as, quote, that section number, that section symbol 28 is very typical of AI when you ask it about RONR. If you do that, you'll see that it uses that section symbol. That's not proper. It's proper when you're referring to a whole section like 56, but it's not proper when you're referring to things like 17, 28, 21. Now I've got 2 footnotes here that we need to read. So that first footnote where I say RONR 21 and 28 do not say what is claimed. I said, for example, do the bylaws really take precedence over all other rules and practices? No. Procedural law, and I give a citation that if you go there, it actually reads it, and the corporate charter take precedence. Can rules really not be overridden? I say, not that it is relevant, except to show that the improper handling of RONR and the Roos amicus, but RONR 28 paragraph 4 describes how certain rules contained within bylaws can in fact be overridden. And then I put a screenshot of the Kindle version, which is the same thing as in the hard copy, on how to properly cite Roberts. And you'll notice that when it's like, I don't know if you could see it down there, but like when it's 28, you wouldn't put section number. You go RONR, and you should put in 12th edition, just 2:8. No section number. Anyone who's familiar with citing Roberts would know that. But AI constantly does it this way. And then I also said, I use M dashes, ironically, and I think I took them out actually in editing, so that's pretty funny. I said I used M dashes unironically, and then I deleted them unironically. Unfortunately, AI has ruined those too. I say, also note that the correct citation format is as shown below, though it is customary in the party to shorten RONR 12th edition to just RONR. One should never use the section symbol unless really referring to an entire section and not a pin citation. Okay. Now let's go to his response to me. Let me get that up on the screen. And we're just going to go to where he just completely missed the point. Okay, I need to get this up on my screen. And I believe this was written by AI as well, but not quite as sure. But let me tell you something, ask you something. If someone corrected you on how to properly cite something, and you actually understood and read it, and you wrote something else afterwards, wouldn't you properly cite it? He doesn't. He keeps using the section symbol improperly. It'd be like, and this is an example, I know this isn't exactly precise, but let's say you were someone who were just reading the Bible and you never heard it spoken aloud. And you are trying to cite a passage or a book to someone. And you go 2 Corinthians, and they go, oh, no. The way you say it is 2 Corinthians. But if you still went around saying 2 Corinthians, you'd look like a dumbass. And that's what happened after he's been corrected on proper citation method. Not my opinion. The way the book says to cite it. Acknowledging the party custom is to drop the 12th edition part, he still cites it wrong, which makes me think he didn't really read what I said, or he just ran it through AI, which ignored that. So we're going to concentrate on this mootness thing. LNC actions are still in effect. No, they're not. Your opinion of them is, but the action doesn't exist anymore, just like in that article I read. Says the Harlow's response argues that the controversy is moot because the alleged breach has been healed by Mr. Wiley eventually being seated as Region 1 second alternate. I actually didn't make that argument explicitly there, but that is one of the ways it was healed, but it was ultimately mooted by the fact that Wiley resigned and someone else holds that position. This argument misunderstands both the relief requested in this appeal and the parliamentary principles governing continuing breaches. I'm sorry, Roos, you are just wrong. I'm not claiming I'm the holy grail. Listen, I get things in Roberts wrong. I'm still learning every day. But this is basic. This is not a continuing breach. Go ask any parliamentarian, literally any parliamentarian, if this is a continuing breach. Don't get into JC and all that, whether that's relevant. Just ask any parliamentarian, give them the fact pattern that someone, say, someone was illegitimately declared to be ineligible. They went and jumped through the hoops to become eligible. They were subsequently undeniably, legitimately elected and later resigned from their position. Is that original decision that they weren't eligible a continuing breach? There is not a single parliamentarian that would agree with you. Okay, maybe I should, because there's always there's a nut everywhere, I guess. But just like back when everyone was arguing whether the internet is a place and all of that, and whether we could have an electronic convention, I was not able to find a single parliamentarian there that agreed with any of the wacky interpretations by members. It's crystal clear that we could not have an electronic convention. And on this, okay, you might be able to find some lone nut. So let's just say 99% of nobody's going to agree with you here, Roos. So it really does take a lot of chutzpah to say, I'm not understanding something so basic. I can assure you, I understand this. Now, could I be wrong that the mootness principle applies to JC appeals? Most certainly. I don't believe I am. But it is, in fact, moot when it comes to a point of order. It says you can't void actions that don't have continuing force. Okay. He says the attempt by national officers to void a regional election. I'm not sure. There's a big debate in Roberts whether the word officer means any board member or actually means like officers, as in chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer. I'm just going to assume he means board members because this was an action of the LNC, not just the party officers. And again, he goes, through administrative interpretation. That's not a phrase used in parliamentary parlance. That is such AI. What does that even mean? It was a ruling on a point of order. That's not you could just say interpretation. But what the heck is administrative interpretation? Constitutes a breach of the bylaws of a continuing nature because it asserts authority. No, it asserted. It's over and done with. He claims not granted in the governing documents and continues to affect the governance of the party. That's not what a continuing breach means. I explained it to you. It's that specific item. Is that continuing? No, it isn't. He might claim the LNC might do it again. They certainly might, but that doesn't make it a continuing breach. That means it's something that perhaps convention delegates need to amend the bylaws about, but it's not a continuing breach. It's funny when someone claims that one person just doesn't understand something basic and they turn around and show that they don't understand it. Because this isn't something fancy. And he claims that I agree with him, because actions adopted in conflict with an organization's bylaws remain subject to challenge so long as the action continues to have force and effect. He doesn't understand what continues to have force and effect. He didn't understand this article. This article directly disagrees with him. So, and then he gets into sustaining membership and eligibility for office are inseparable. No, they're not. But I want to show, I think that's been argued enough. So we're going to, he's going to say something later. But here, the R&R citations in the Roos response are relevant. I showed that the R&R citations don't support the point he said. I'm not saying that the point he said was wrong. I'm saying the citations he used didn't support it. The Harlow's response criticizes the use of citations to foundational sections of R&R. You heard me. Is that what I did? No. My criticism was that the citations he used didn't support the point he was making. These citations were intentional. Well, that's unfortunate. Intentionally by your AI, because they explain the basic principles governing deliberative assemblies and the role of bylaws. Oh my God, that's such gobbledygook. That's such. No one. Well, actually, I showed where some of his points were wrong, but the point just went right over his head. R&R explains that deliberative bodies operate according to general parliamentary law. I bet you he couldn't even explain what that is. Unless they adopt their own governing rules. What does that have to do with anything? What? Yeah, so is anyone claiming otherwise? Did anyone anywhere claim otherwise? No, they didn't. He's quoting 1.5 here. Let me go back to my thing here. Yeah, so let's go. So he's oh, I didn't here's hold on 1 second. Yeah, that's where we are. So he's quoting 1.5 for something that nobody ever disputed. Of course, why would he quote a deliberative assembly that has not adopted any rules is commonly understood to hold itself bound by the rules and customs of general parliamentary law? Why is he quoting that? This assembly has adopted rules. So this isn't relevant. Plus, he is saying the R&R citations in the Roos response are relevant, and he's citing 1.5 here, which doesn't have anything to do with anything, but he didn't cite 1.5 in the other one. So why is he bringing it up now? This is so obviously AI. R&R further explains why organizations adopt governing rules. Who disputes that? Now, at least here, he is citing 2.1, which he cited before. But if you remember before, he cited 2.1 to say bylaws take precedence over all other rules and practices. Is that what that 2.1 right there says? No, it doesn't say that. It just it says that you should have formally adopted rules because basically parliamentary law it lacks a general understanding and it can be vague in some things. This sentence is not relevant. We have adopted rules. No one disputes that, and no one disputes they're important. This whole thing about general parliamentary law has nothing to do with anything here. His AI wrote this, okay, but he was too stupid to figure out it has nothing to do with anything here. This is, I think the use of AI is bad faith, but his lack of understanding, that's not bad faith. He just doesn't get it. And R1R clarifies the role of bylaws within an organization. Nobody disputes that. And at least that citation is somewhat relevant. Okay, the role of bylaws, but you notice what he quoted here is saying the Constitution or bylaws contain its own basic rules relating to itself as an organization. Fine. But is that how he cited 2.8 and the thing I objected to? No. What he cited to 2.8 was rules cannot be overridden through interpretation or administrative practice. Is that what he's saying here? No. So he's proven my whole AI point and my whole irrelevance point in his response, and he thinks this is good. But notice something. Look how he's citing Roberts incorrectly because it's AI. All he had to do was remove the section marks there. Oh my God. Lord have mercy. I'm seeing if there's anything else. Yeah, there was one other thing I wanted to claim in here. Okay. This is another thing where he has completely missed my point. It says that recognizing sustaining membership rights in the absence of explicit suspension language would produce absurd result. No, that isn't what I suggested at all. I said his interpretation of what rights are would. That's a bit different, but again, because this was written by AI, that subtlety is missed. This concern ignores longstanding party practices governing sustain. No, mine's the one that recognizes it and doesn't render it absurd. But he talks about calculation of regional representation. I didn't mention that at all. I didn't mention anything about members being asked to renew. That has nothing to do with anything, because what has to do with something here is formal dropping from the membership rolls. And then he says, LNC staff regularly use the existing formula of $25 in the last 365 days. They actually don't. I don't know where he got that from. It's $25 within the last 12 months. 12 months is different than 365 days. Let me explain. When is it a full month? It is part of a month. I'd like to see the bylaws amended to 365 days. That provides greater clarity. But that doesn't matter. He's saying what they do, but he doesn't explain how, if they retain every characteristic of sustaining membership, even when lapsed, they should be counted. He's saying that they don't. That's my point. He can't apply that consistently. Plus, yeah, let me see here. That sentence doesn't make any sense. He goes, however, there's no need for a national delegate to be a BSM member. That's a bylaws sustaining member. I never said that. But let's talk about that for a second, because this is the only place where the issue that the bylaws do not provide for dropping from the membership rolls in order to lose your voting rights. I would argue this doesn't apply here, but I can make an argument that it does as well. It says delegates shall be required to be members of either the party or an affiliate party. So there's no need for a national delegate to be a BSM member. Yeah, there is, if they're not a member of Actually, no, it's just the parties. They don't need to be bylaw sustaining membership. But I didn't bring this up anyway, so I don't know why he's saying that, but I misread that. So make a self-correction there. So yeah, there's no case in which then never mind. I said I can make an argument, but no, there's no argument at all. I kept thinking you needed to be a bylaw sustaining member. So there's no circumstance in which there's a voting right that would be impinged. The National Party doesn't have a cattle call election. It's through delegates at convention. People who do not participate in party activities do not ask for protection of their membership rights. That doesn't matter. If you have rights, they're your rights, whether you ask for them or not. A right is something that you don't have to ask for. You just have it. You don't have to exercise it. You still have it. I can't believe a libertarian wrote that. And I guess, and now he's saying it matters whether they identify as current members. So now we're getting even more complicated. So should we still count members in arrears towards delegate allocations only if they wish to still be identified? Now we got to determine how they identify. These customs reflect a long-standing practical understanding that sustaining membership status is administered through custom focused on renewal and participation. This is so AI. Not through instantaneous administration determinations of ineligibility. What was that word salad? Those were words? Roos, I know the way delegate allocations are done, but that would be a custom, if your interpretation is correct, a custom that would fall to the ground, because once custom conflicts, Robert's rules has a higher authority because he's claiming that whole thing on loss of membership rights, and he's making membership rights include this whole penumbra of things. It's your interpretation. This isn't just custom. This is in accordance with the bylaws, because not everything that attaches to sustaining membership, even if voting rights are retained, remains intact. I don't think you understood the weight of your argument from absurdity. And he says, I didn't address something, right? I didn't say I was going to address everything. But here's what's funny. Let's do the conclusion. The Harlow's response cannot withstand scrutiny. Well, we just scrutinized it pretty well here. Neither can her action. What actions taken in this matter? Funny, for once, I didn't do anything. The chair asked me to make an email announcement to the thread, to the LNC list. I didn't make any decisions. If he means, did I vote to sustain his ruling? Yes, me and a majority of other LNC members. But here, what actions? Dude, crack is whack, man. Put the pipe down. Okay. Hopefully you guys, let's get this off the screen. Can see now that or at least see my point, whether, whoops, there's another one. You agree with it or not, that the mootness issue is central here. And if it wasn't for him not understanding the scold I gave over AI, I probably wouldn't have responded on the show at all. But you could tell he didn't understand the point at all. He didn't go like, oopsie, he didn't even change his citation method. Well, I hope you found that somewhat entertaining. And I hope you all have a good night. I'm trying to think of what my next show is going to be so I could give you all an announcement. Maybe I'll do a history show. I'm not sure. I need to look up the Melania Trump case. see if anything's going on with the Candace Owens case, but I don't think there'll be there will be anything going on until April 28th. I am editing down my next installment of the critique of the case for Christian nationalism. I did edit the first 30-something minutes, and I messed something up, and it sampled out at like resolution of 640 by 360. It was awful, and I didn't save like the original editing file. It's in Filmora. I think it's like I don't remember what the extension is. It's not a video file. It's like the editing layer. So I have to start all over. Okay. Maybe I'll do a better job at editing this time. Maybe that was God's way of telling me, no, that wasn't a good editing job. Okay, well, that is it for this evening. And I'm looking, if you're wondering why I'm stalling, I put something as covering. So there's the closing screen. Okay, everyone, I really appreciate you. Bye-bye.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business, not because they want to